I am excited to start our session of deploying yourself. This is our Joel. Nice to see you. Hey Megan, very happy to have you with us. Today we're going to talk about something really, really important. I want to warn you because there will be a few things we're going to say that might kind of upset you or so I really invite you to join me with with a real feeling about what's happening within yourself as we do this work, because today we're going to touch on something that is a little bit sensitive. So I really hope that you will continue to join me next week after today, because it's really one of those sessions where people have normally strong reaction. I want to talk about today's topic. I put on this chart the cards that we already talked about. The one in white are the one that we will be talking about. This is a little reminder of the important topic we have touched so far. The one in blue and the one in white are the one we're going to talk about today. And I have to say, I want to talk about this concept, which I think it's really one of the central concepts of my leadership practice, the concept of the balcony. What is the balcony? The balcony is an invitation to be deliberate, a space for different interpretation, for different information. So, people that come normally to those classes are people that are very good on what we call the dance floor, the actual place where you actually get into action and you do stuff, you make things happen. The balcony captures the mental activity of stepping back in the midst of action and asking, what's really going on here? And that's really, a few practical ideas are more complex than this one, because it's really hard. We all get swept up in the midst of action, particularly when it becomes intense or personal. And that is exactly when we need most to pause. So self-reflection does not come naturally in those situations. And yet the balcony is an invitation to read beyond the story we tell ourselves about reality, and to get a vantage point when we can reach new sources and new perspectives. Now, I don't want to be too intangible. I want to be clear and give you a sense of what do I mean when I mean balcony. Well, for example, in the midst of a meeting where things are not going well, being on the balcony means to jump and think about different thing. I give you an example of the different thing that we could actually be thinking when we are on a balcony. Think like this, for example. Do you notice that people are coming in or coming out? Does everyone seem equally welcome in the meeting? Who are the people that participates? What happened? What qualities distinguish the people in the group during the conversation? What is a subgroup? Which group members have a very high influence in this group? What are the shift? What caused the shift? Is there any rivalry that is hidden, maybe not expressed? What kind of communication happens here? Who talks with whom? Who interrupts? What is the tone of the communication? Who makes decision in this group, in this situation, in this meeting? Who try to make consensus? What behavior are used to do work? Who cuts other off? Who try to summarize? Who does this work? Now, this is really, really hard, isn't it? It's really a very hard activities, because it's an activities in which we are asked, in a sense, to be in two places at the same time. And I would say that is for this very reason that there are, kind of real religion, that actual religious tradition that have a word for this activity. The Jesuits called this skill contemplation in action. And the Hindus and the Buddhists call this skill mindfulness. In sport, we call it being in and out of the game at the same time. So I would say, why so many forms of spiritual tradition and religion have this concept? I would say because very few tasks are so hard as this one. And very few tasks train our abilities to actually, when we are mobilizing ourselves for change. So deploying ourselves means to be able to be on the balcony and to do it well. Now, how do we build this in our life instead of getting into action? I mean, think about it. The last pandemic, this pandemic we just had, has been an incredible opportunity to sit on the balcony and observe our own life. COVID-19 has put us all on the balcony. How do we become better meaning-making machines? And, the balcony is not just reflection. The balcony is really a skill we should develop in the midst of action, but it's also an invitation to be humble, an invitation to actually consider the larger perspective. And last but not least, is an antidote to oversimplification. Because when we step on the balcony, we immediately appreciate, the complexity of whatever reality we are trying to change. Now, especially in politics, today's, the complexity of the work comes right into focus as soon as we get on the balcony, because we realize a variety of variables at play, a variety of situation, a variety of things that leave us, sometimes even shocked. And, I have to tell you, especially in politics today, there is, great attractiveness towards simple solution to complex problem. There is almost this idea, like the infamous immigration wall. We want a simple solution to complex problem. So the truth is, the moment we enter in the balcony, we cannot avoid the understanding of the other issue that we need to deal with, and that is the issue of complexity. Now, the challenge of change is often misunderstood at trying to a need to better deal or cope with complexity. And, but the thing is that there is a complexity of the world and there is the capacity of our brain to understand complexity. Now, we're not talking about coping, because coping and dealing involve adding a new skill, widening our repertoire of responses, but we still stay the same person. It's almost like we have simply developed a new app on our cell phone. But when I'm talking about, we're still the same person that we were before. We just have learned to cope. But coping and dealing are valuable skills, but they're not sufficient for meeting today's change challenge. So what I would say that in reality, the experience of complexity is not just a story about the world, but it's a story about the mismatch between the demands of the world and the capacity of the person or of the organization. So when we experience the world as too complex, what we are really saying is that there is a mismatch between the complexity of what we are observing and our own ability to deal with that complexity. Now, there is not a lot that we can do. There are two things that we can do in this situation. The first one will be to reduce the complexity, of the world. And I don't think that that's going to happen. The other one is to increase our ability to deal with complexity. And there is very good news from research on adult development, who is actually confirming that it's possible for us to continue to grow and actually being able to deal with more complexity than we are used to. New research is giving us a very new picture. We can develop our ability to continue to develop our mental complexity in adulthood. So, human beings, we know, we construct reality. And what we mean by that is when we construct the reality that we see. And so, mental complexity, because we construct reality, we may say the mental complexity is not about how smart you are in the ordinary sense of the word, is not, your IQ is high or low, or is not about developing more abstract apprehension of the world, of being able to understand a difficult equation on a blackboard. That's not what we're talking about, because that's, again, that would be the skill, improving a skill. What we are talking about is constructing a variety of perspective and concept to make sense of the world. So we mean having a greater complexity so that we can perceive more. We can take more effective action. Carl Wake used to say that no one is ever free to do something he can think of. So the idea is we cannot even imagine, something that, so it's not an issue of just improving what we are already having. We're talking about a radical leap. Keeping the example of the app, it would be changing cell phone, changing operating system, not just adding and downloading another app. So the good news about, I was saying, about adult complexity is that mental complexity increases with age. And, some people call it wisdom, but there are considerable variation even within the same age. In mental complexity, people move through those evolution of mental complexity at different speed. And many of us, if not most of us, get stuck and we do not reach our most complex peaks. And another information here is that development does not unfold continuously. So it's not something that continues. We do have the potential to actually develop like that, but we don't always take that potential. Now, we can only talk about mental complexity if we are, as we observe ourselves and experience it in our own life. So we can only talk about mental complexity only as we stay on the balcony for ourselves. Now, stay on the balcony for ourselves, it's kind of complicated because it's what many of you call self-awareness, isn't it? Meaning observing yourself. And I realize that I am a very complex person. And I think a lot of the concepts we discussed so far have pointed that out, the complexity that exists. And so the issue here is when we observe ourselves, the observer and the observed are the same. And so that is a very, very problematic issue that we add to this process. And so, it comes to mind, this idea of Tennessee Williams. This is a famous poem. He used to say, there comes a time when you look into a mirror and you realize that what you see is all you ever be. Then you accept it, or you kill yourself, or you stop looking at mirrors. So if we spend too much time scrutinizing the rear view mirror, we're certain to crash into a light post. And now the issue is why people look at mirrors. Why people look at mirrors. Now, we all want to be more self-aware. If we talk about self-awareness, I notice that there are two kinds of people. Those that think that they're self-aware and those that are actually self-aware. And I say this as a joke, but the truth is that 95% of people interviewed in research about self-awareness, they actually think that they're self-aware, but the truth is when you do a research and you use some stringent criteria to actually define self-awareness, you come up that on a good day, 80% of us is lying to ourselves about whether we are lying to ourselves. So this is a rather sad image. Now, there are two kinds of self-awareness that I want to talk to you about, that they're very important in this conversation. And I think that I hope that with those, defining those two self-awareness can actually help us understand it a bit better. The first kind of self-awareness is the one that we all know, that we call internal self-awareness, knowing who we are from the inside out. But then there is another kind, and this is the one I want to talk to you today, the external self-awareness, knowing how other people see us. Now, unfortunately, when we talk about self-awareness, we normally talk about the first one a lot, internal self-awareness, but we don't talk about the external self-awareness. But to be self-aware, you have to be focusing on both. And those two kinds of self-awareness are equally important. And research is telling us that people who are self-aware are more fulfilled, have stronger relationships, are more creative, more confident, better communicator, and so on. And we also know that people that are less self-aware, people that introspect, that focus on their internal self-awareness, interestingly enough, are more stressed, more depressed. They're less satisfied with their job, they're less happy about their relationship, and feel less in control of their life. And this is a very interesting conundrum, because it's telling us that there are negative consequences about introspection. Because the idea is that focusing only on internal self-awareness may not give us the courage to assess our external self-awareness. So, thinking about ourselves isn't related about knowing ourselves. Isn't that interesting? So, no matter how hard we try, we cannot excavate our unconscious thoughts and feelings. And because there is so much hidden from our conscious awareness, I mean, the truth is that we end up making up answers. And it's called confabulation. It's actually studied. We don't have time to talk about it here. But when we are actually focusing on ourselves, because conscious awareness is not totally conscious, we end up making up answers. Anyway, I'm not here to tell you today not to think about yourself. I am here to tell you to do it a bit differently. And I'm here to tell you that we need to build the ability to see ourselves clearly, but first, because we can't excavate our unconscious thoughts and feelings, we need to do it differently. We need to actually, for example, stop asking why and start asking what. I'll give you an example. You get a bad performance review. You get a bad rather than say, why did I receive a bad performance review? It's much more helpful to ask, what can I do to show that I'm the best person on this job? If you lose your job, rather than why this is happening to me, what's most important to me? It's a much better question. If you feel depressed, why do I feel so terrible? It's not very effective as a question, but what are the situations that make me feel better? That is a much more productive and helpful question. And I want to tell you, it's not just about asking what instead of why, but it's also be alert for wake-up calls. Paradoxically, people that are very focused on internal self-awareness, they do not get the alarm clock moment in which you got to be ready. They are maybe too lost in journaling or thinking about themselves that they don't actually use that knowledge for anything that really is worthwhile. In other words, we don't learn from experience. We need to be alert to learn from experience. Otherwise, the experience just passes us by. So, you might be lost about reflecting about yourself. And so this self-obsession then became a problem. So what do I mean? We need to develop, rather than the ability to see ourselves clearly, rather we need to develop the ability to see in ourselves what we can't see. And this is a really, it can be summarized in a very simple question, which I want to ask you. I want to see what is your answer. Do you know the story? Do you know the story that people tell about you? Do you know the story that people tell about you? I mean, this is a very interesting point to make. Do you know the story that people tell about you? Now, yes, of course, you're self-aware. You know your own image. You know who you are, and but to move from the ability to see of ourselves clearly to the ability to see in ourselves what we can't see, we need to do much more than introspection. We need to actually. What's the one thing that you hear constantly from people about yourself that irritates you? This is a question that I'm not going to ask you to answer in a breakout group, but it's a question that I really would like for you to think for a moment. Because this is really a critical question in terms of that external self-awareness that we were discussing earlier. Because, I know for a fact that there are things that I consistently hear from people about myself that irritates me. And when I do that, when I hear that, I know that there is a chance that if I were to address that, I would deny who I think I am, and we go back in that authenticity paradox that we talked last week. Or it would make me feel like I betray my loyalties, the concept of loyalties we talked about last week. Or I would feel that I would deny one of my core values. Or it would make me act in a situation outside of my repertoire, so I would not know what to do. I mean, chances are there is one thing that often irritates you and you have not addressed it, is possibly for one of those reasons. So one need to start thinking, think about how maybe what we have already worked on in the concept we have discussed before have already at the beginning of an answer for this concept. If we are thinking this way, what we are really focusing here is actually what are our blind spots. What are those things that we cannot see? Now, in science, there is the famous concept of the Johari window, the idea that is known to others but unknown to ourselves. And this is a key concept because blind spot are really important as distortion of our reality about ourselves. Now, this is a session where we have talked several times. There is no way that we can separate the work that we do individually from the work that we do in changing the environment around us. They all happen at the same time. Yet, when we talk about blind spot, we may have blind spot that are about ourselves as well as about the reality around us. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. I would love for you to take notes for this 3 questions and see if you can answer those 3 questions within yourself. If you can reflect on those 3 questions, which I found extremely helpful to find those blind spots and to identify them and to develop that external self-awareness which we have discussed. The first one, how do you define yourself according to them? Not according to you, but according to them. Like if Cindy give me all her friends and I talk to her friends and I say, hey, friends of Cindy, who is Cindy? And they would define it. The question is, would that image be the same that Cindy has? And of course, I'm taking Cindy just as an example because I see you in the screen. Or Catherine, or Joel, or anyone else here. And now here is 3 questions that I have found to be extremely valuable to develop external self-awareness. We might call it truth and dare, because it's really try to find the truth and dare about yourself. The first one, ask the people you love, that love you and know you best. Now, some people ask me, are spouses included in this? I do not know. I would not do it with spouses, but if you want to do it with spouses, you're welcome. I would go with friends, with dear friends. But let's say, first question, what do you know about me that could be helpful for me to know? Oh my gosh, what a question. A question that is really, really tough to ask, but that can reveal real gold when you ask your friend. A second question, another truth and dare. What is the story that people tell about myself? Ask somebody in the office or in your group. Now, this needs to be a person that care about you. What is the story that people tell about myself? And last but not least, I don't want any responsibility if you were to ask this question and you will receive a bad answer. I would actually hope that the answer will help you develop yourself. The third question: what should I change, improve to become a better version of myself? Now, those are very courageous questions to ask. Very, very courageous question to ask. And as we think about those questions, I wonder if we can actually begin to have the beginning of a revelation about what are those elements of ourself that we really need to continue to work on. I don't want to talk about yourself in the abstract because ultimately, I think that the real issue here is what's the change that is in front of you and what's the capacity that you do have to deliver it? Because that's really the key question that I often ask in my work for change, either in organization or individual. What's the change in front of you and what's the capacity that you have or not to deliver that change? I mean, that is really the critical question, whether this is a personal question or a question that we ask for another purpose. I would say that this is really a critical question to ask. But what I really would like to do instead is make you reflect on whether or not those capacity that we want to develop are somehow linked to those gaps, perception gaps, to those, to those blind spots that we were discussing before. Now, those are common perception gaps, and this goes to a document which I will deliver to you in the email that I will send you. And I want to show you this document because I'm sure that you will be able to use it, and maybe you can kind of use it, with some kind of value. So you see, you click on a perception gap, and it gives you kind of an overview of that blind spot. Or some people, for example, are intelligent and well qualified, but they might be perceived as condescending or elitist. Or some other people may be composed and steady, but may be also perceived as robotic and indifferent. So in this document, I have put 11 common perception gap that, key question that can actually give you kind of an overview, and you can see if you recognize yourself in any of this. So this is a document that I will be sharing with you in the email that I will send you. But what I think would be more helpful, rather than talking about perception gap or blind spot in the abstract, I think it would be to think instead about the important question that I was telling you earlier. And I want to give you a few minutes in a breakout room so that you can actually start thinking about those key questions. And that question is, what's the change that's in front of you that you're dealing with right now? And what's the capacity to deliver that change? So again, I would like to put you for a few minutes, maybe 8 minutes, in this breakout room and ask you, what's the change that is in front of you right now? And what's the capacity to deliver that change? Let's start the breakout room for 7-8 minutes, group of 4, if possible. And let's see how we can begin to answer. Again, the question is, what's the change in front of you and what's the capacity to deliver? Of course, I have no way to know what you have discussed in your group. If the conversation was as exciting as it was in our group, I can tell you that one thing is becoming rather clear, that there is a lot that is going on in our life at the moment, and that because there is a lot going on, I think it would be disingenuous to think that we were to say that, everything is working I mean, we cannot say that everything is working. Inevitably we say, you know what, there is, this is my life, the circle is my life. Something is working, but it's not everything. I mean, there's something that needs to be fixed. So let's say that there is a part that is working well, and that part is nice, and we're super excited about that. But then, we also ask what's not working, what's actually not really doing what is supposed to do. What are the things that get in the way? What are the things that are broken? And you have noticed that in this conversation, we often have identified some of those. And then the third thing might be to say, what are the things that are missing? What are things that are not there right now? Things that are missing. And a fourth thing could be to say, what are the things that are confusing? So when I ask this question, they seem kind of obvious to people, but the truth is, underneath there are a lot of nuances, and what's working and what's get confused. People don't know if something is not working or missing or confusing. Whatever the way you make sense of this, I think it's helpful to identify those buckets, because I'm sure you're not surprised. We want to talk about leadership, but we want to lead. We want to actually make an impact in the world. I mean, this class has started with the idea of changing the world. So we want to actually take step and understand what's in those buckets. The interesting part is that you can apply those 4 categories to almost everything, to parenting, to what's working in my consulting practice, in your teaching practice. I mean, it's a very helpful way to categorize a lot of things. When I work in organization or an institution, this is a very important first step to actually understand what is the work that needs to happen. And what is also really interesting is that this is a step to be more specific because your identified bucket of works in reality, bucket of work for yourself. In adaptive change, what you try to do is, for the stuff that is working, you're trying to optimize. You're trying to actually say, this is actually working, the things are working, we don't want to leave them be. We want to figure out, how do I multiply their effect? How do I actually do it even better? How do I drive to efficiencies and greater outcome? For the things that are not working, we're trying to stop or change some of the things that are not working. And of course, for what's missing, we need to add what's missing and clarify what's confusing. Now, why am I sharing with you this model? Because we want to start getting a map at our own level. Before, I talked to you about trying to actually see what's the change we have in front of us and what's the capacity to deal with it. Now, is that capacity missing? Is that capacity not working well and needs to actually being improved? Or is that capacity confusing at the moment? So the capacity to know what I need to do next comes from listening. And what I do in those situations, I just get to work with groups or individual. I start listing what are those things that are in each of these quadrants. I invite you to do the same. I will send you this form, an empty form, for next time, so that you have a chance to write this up. And here is what inevitably happens when we write this up. There are 2 kinds of issues that normally feel those ideas. The first kind is, there are some things that are technical. For example, in my group, we were talking about becoming a better presenter. Now, how do you become a better presenter? Or how do you become a better presenter? Maybe you take a course. Maybe you go to a class. That is what we would call technical. So we learn the technical part of a skill. But then, the problem with presentation is that there is an issue of being timid. Sometimes when you're timid, you are actually not really ready. So there is also an element in presentation skills that is also about, how do you show up in the world? So how do you show up in the world? And that part is a bit more complex. If, for example, your change is trying to think more about yourself, well, guess what? You have to change your self-image. That's not something you can learn in a class. So there is an element of that problem that is easy to do. Easy, not easy. I mean, it's tough. I mean, you can become a surgeon. It's not easy, but it's doable, correct? There is technical knowledge to actually get you there. But, you know, when you have to become a better parent, or when you have to become a bit more extrovert, or you have to learn to trust more, I mean, this is a different domain of problem. A domain of problem that I would say that requires not just learning, require developing a new capacity. And so what I do in those kind of situations is trying to think about what is it that I am trying to learn here, and what is the next step. And inevitably what comes up is that I'm developing a new capacity which I would say is at the heart of adaptation. What is this new capacity that is taking the place of a legacy practice? What is a new capacity that can actually become the thing that I need to develop right now in order to become more authentically who I am in this new phase of my life? Now, those kind of adaptation, you know, are really, really interesting. And, you know, we normally understand those adaptation if we take the time, I would say, to ask a few questions that are related to who we are, but they're also related to who we want to be. And I want to give you an example of a few of those questions. There will be linked to your slide when I send it to you, because they're questions that I think summarize a little bit the work that we have done up to this point. We have talked about a lot of things. We have talked about deploying yourself, but, you know, there are questions that I think it's important to ask. What is my current idea of leadership? Is how we started this class? Or what are my sources of energy? Or which repertoire has been invoked by my work on leadership? And so on, with a lot of the concept that we had discussed before. You will have a chance to go through this in more detail. But what I want to really point out for now is the importance of this idea of asking yourself important questions. Asking yourself important question as a way to actually start learning about yourself in a different way. And I think that as you start learning, as you start moving towards this kind of experiment, it's very, very precious for you to really stand at that balcony and try maybe something that you could do from there. For example, 3 experiments to see yourself more clearly, to be a bit more clear about who you are from an external perspective. The openness experiment, or the learning of the intelligent playing experiment. You have a chance to see this. I will send you the slide, of course. Those are 3 minimal suggestions that I often ask my student, and then I, as a way to kind of force them to put themselves out there. Put themselves out there, because, you know, the danger of a class like this, and I think that you are very, you might very well empathize with me teaching it also this way, is that, you know, we have been talking a lot and sharing a lot of beautiful concepts, but, you know, nothing really happens here in the world about ourselves. You will not get more self-aware listening to somebody with an Italian accent sharing with you a few slides, unfortunately. There is a need to actually get dirty and practice in the openness of the world. And that is really the important part that comes at this point. I want to say something as we close our 3rd session that has to do with where we are in our journey talking about the work that we have been doing so far. Today marks the 3rd session that we have been doing together. And, you know, a lot of concept have been shared. You might remember at one point, I have shared with you this chart, this slide on the first session, telling you that, insinuating the doubt that what if everything you know about leadership was wrong? And I think that a lot of things have actually start coming into better focus. I talked to you at the time, instead of vision, taking responsibility. And you remember the concept of purpose, which really has completely changed the concept of vision. It's no longer the vision for the organization, but become your own personal purpose. And the purpose inevitably forces you to take responsibility. We have talked about, instead of talking about motivation, we talked about designing environments for performance. I mean, if you remember when we talk about intrinsic motivation, we have talked about that for ourselves, but imagine how powerful, if you are a supervisor, to discover the intrinsic motivation for your subordinates and tap into that as an attempt to improve performance. We have talked about the concept of being right. And instead, we talked about designing experience that might fail. I mean, the balcony concept that we have talked today, it was not about doing things that will be perfectly right. It will be about doing things that might fail. It is about designing the experiment and being very intentional about the fact that I want to see what happens when I do this. And that is a very different approach for being obsessed to being right. We talked about safety first. But, you know, I am actually suggesting that you grow your tolerance for discomfort. I mean, you remember when we talk about repertoire, we talked about the idea of what I know, but realizing that there is a lot that we know that we don't know, but there is also a lot that we do not know that we do not know. And so that it's very different to venture outside of that safety in order to find a new edge for ourselves. We talk about agreeing to disagree, and instead we're talking about conflict as a creative force. I mean, think about when we talk about the self and the loyalties, how in reality conflict can be an incredible source of personal growth if we understand it better, if we actually see where is it coming from. And, you know, we talked about, of course, rather than making personal, try to understand clearly the difference between self and role. Rather than seeing who we are, trying to realize that there is a multiplicity of role that we play and that our self is not such a fixed concept as we like it to be. And then, of course, vulnerability as a door to growth or other things that we have said that time. But, you know, we have still another session, but in the next session, I really would like to push you towards, you know, being a bit more audacious and bold in deciding what's next for you. And so for next time, what I really would love for you to do is to actually, well, as you know, I've been sending you some videos in the meantime, but there is a video in which you can find your own good improvement goal. And I would like for you to actually think about your purpose, the one that you came to this session with, and then think about what is that thing that is totally in your power to improve? What is the new capacity? What is that thing that will make you a better version of yourself? And you know that if you will manage to get that goal, oh man, that change is going to happen. And you know, what I would love for you to do is also fill out that form at the link. I will send you this form with the 4 buckets of change so that you will have a chance to truly get in touch with what are those very different capacities that you can rely on, that you can work on in order to become a better version of yourself. Now, this is the end of our third session of deploying yourself. We have explored a variety of concepts, all with the purpose of trying to come up with some ideas that would be strong enough for us to truly improve the way we deploy ourselves. My hope is that the improvement goal will be an opportunity for all of you, as you develop one before your next session, to actually start thinking in very clear terms, what is the next step for each of you? This concludes our third session of deploying yourself, but I want to leave you some time for your questions, and I'm sure there will be many, because I know that the topic of self-awareness and blind spot causes a lot of turmoil normally in people. So very happy to answer all your questions on this topic if you have any. I didn't say that you're going for accuracy. This is not at all about accuracy. This is about perceptions. You're not trying to ask them to define you. You're trying to tell them how you're being perceived. So this is not a quest to actually believe what you're told. This is what I tell my clients when we do, my students, when we do design thinking session. Do not believe your client. Listen to your client, but don't believe your client, because if you believe your client, you're gonna go stuck like they are stuck. So I ask you to listen to what they are telling you. I'm not asking you to believe it, but at the same time, I ask you to be really scared if there is a shared perception of you that is completely inaccurate based on your own standard, Joel, because that would point to real gold that people are sharing with you that I really hope you will take into consideration. Sorry, I didn't give you the answer that probably you wanted to hear, but that's the best that I can do at the moment. At least 3, at least, but I would not, the attitude is not who is right, who is wrong. The attitude is, why am I perceived like this? And for a change, my recommendation is to assume that they are right. Oh man, this is a tough one. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine to ask people, think about yourself and assume that they're right? Man, it's really, really hard. TJ, what's your question? Absolutely. It's my job when I work in organizational change. But I think that you're trying to evade the bigger question here, which is why don't you want to use it at the personal level? I mean, yes, that's true. That happens. And I have to be honest with you, I'm not the same with you as I am with my student of a class that I teach. I'm not the same when I talk with my wife. I'm not the same when I talk with the neighbor that I don't like. I'm not the same when I talk with the neighbor that I like. So I think that this is it's kind of normal. I mean, the truth about ourselves is a different story. What we're trying to do here is trying to understand why are we perceived one way and what's there. I mean, this is a true research project, Right, but the danger is if we do that, we will minimize the impact of that feedback. And that is why I was telling Joel to believe what you're told. You will listen to people, don't believe to what they're saying, but believe that their perception are sincere and that there is some responsibility that you need to take. I think that it's very tempting to the idea that we are misunderstood. It's really tempting to say, I've been misunderstood, so there's nothing that I can say. I am not like that. I am, but the problem is this is an attempt to take responsibility for our own impact rather than for our own intention. Impact, it's funny, when somebody does something bad to us, they're jerks. If we do something bad to others, our intention was pure. The impact was the problem. So I think that there is a an asymmetry there. Go ahead, Angel. Yes, I do. For example, I normally ask people to identify a first step. That I wanted to talk about that next time, but I can tell you already, the first step is, what is a promising first step? Well, however you define it. What is an encouraging milestone? And what is absolute success? So I normally, for example, if my issue is presentation skills, my encouraging first step is that I present at the company retreat. An encouraging milestone would be that I am invited to present next year, and absolute success is I become a speaker and I now do it for a living. So this is an example of how a simple skill of like becoming better at presenting or being more outgoing or more okay with public speaking can be organized that way. But again, my recommendation, Angel, is, I mean, this is all very important, but again, the danger is to become a bit self-obsessed. And so my job in the kind of function that I'm having in this workshop is to invite you to think, collect this feedback, but then make it immediately actionable. Because, you know, there are people that wait 30 years before speaking in a meeting. Oh, no, let me wait that everybody, oh, okay, oh, no, that person is speaking. Let me wait another second because the important thing has been, oh, okay, oh, he's speaking now. Let me wait another moment. And then, so we are actually the one that close our own voices instead of the world. And so until we actually jump in and do it, you know, which is what I will talk about next week, whether or not it's really helpful, this concept of planning and then do it, or we should actually do it and then see what happens. You know, because this is a very counterintuitive idea here. I'm not asking you to run a project with the project management, you know, skill, but we approach leadership like that many times. You're going to plan all the steps, and if everything goes well, so, I mean, as you saw in the overview of this class, my recommendation for changing the world is not to take this class, is to start doing it. To actually, I don't know, Angel, what is this thing? I don't know what it is, but let's say that thing is to delegate better. I mean, it's important. If I were you, I would go back to the office tomorrow and I would delegate something that I don't feel too comfortable with to somebody. And I would then study myself as that thing happened. Now, I'm not doing it for the vice president presentation, you know, but I would do a safe experiment to actually see what happened and what happened to myself when I do a bit more of what I mean, that becomes an experiment. So I am excited about your willingness to try, but I also want to caution you that planning to try is not the same as trying.
Fair.
So I am excited about your enthusiasm and willingness to do this. And you know, the truth of the matter is that this is very hard to learn without making some mistakes here and there. Because we're not talking about doing a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We're talking about doing something that, as you know, is a complex problem. That's why that map we talk about can be very helpful. Because in that map, you identify stuff that you can learn with the course and stuff that it's a bit deeper. You know, it's maybe about wanting to be needed or wanted to be at the center of attention or having a deeper need that is a little bigger than just presenting, delegating, or, you know, doing something at work. But, you know, we're talking about adult development. We're talking about growing as an individual, as a person. And that's what this is all about. Megan, you're having way too much fun. I would love to have a question from you if you can, or not, or whatever you would like to say, or a comment. Really exciting to see your smile in the. So you're talking about, for example, when at work you are given, there is a restructuring and you are on the receiving end of change, I assume. So, just in very general terms, that's what people call adaptation. I disagree with that, because I don't think that's coping more than adapting, So I think that the conversation there is I very much related to what are your roles in life. I can tell you that every time I add in a situation like the one you described, at one point, my unit was actually almost divided in two, and I lost almost 50% of the people working for me. It was really hard for me, but I was able to survive because I tapped sincerely into other roles that I had in my life. So, for example, at the time, I had other things going on in my sports area. And so when we talk about role and self, we talk about also an incredible potential of ability for yourself to continue to find source of delight in your life, even if, temporarily speaking, your job is not at that moment like that. I mean, I remember a moment where, being a parent was incredibly stressful, especially when the kids were very young. And my job was really, really great at the moment because I was starting a new thing. And so you would move between the different roles, trying to find some kind of fulfillment. One of the danger often, and we see a lot of cases of sexual harassment, is that people do not have this clarity of the role that they're playing. And so they imagine their role to be their life. And when that happens, it becomes really murky, the difference between who you are as an individual and as a person with sexual desire or whatever is and the role that you're playing, for instance, in an office. And that creates very dangerous confusions that are really, really encourage power dynamics that are really terrifying. So it is really important to have that distinction. So I would say that distinction can help. Another thing that can help is maybe an opportunity through the work that we're doing here to understand what could be the next step for you. Because a lot of what we are working in this session is about looking what's the change in front of me and what's the capacity to deal with that change. So maybe there is a need for you now to tap into a different part of your professional persona, and maybe there is a capacity there that you did not have before. So maybe you can ask, I don't know, for a class to be trained on something that you don't know how to do, if that helps you fit better into. So I would say that there is a lot of what we are discussing in this course that can be applied, as I said, to deploy yourself under different circumstances. And let me see if there are more questions. Happy to answer your question if you have more. Xiao, I see you're there. Jay Harris, Tara, I see you're there. Well, I'm excited to, tell you next time we're going to talk about your improvement goals. So please bring it to the class. I'm really excited to talk about that, but we're also talking about what's next and what is actually happening, because this has been, a huge, so far, class in terms of the amount of concept that we have sharing. And I would love to hear from you which concept, are really resonating and staying with you, and which one are, more actionable, less actionable, harder to understand. Always exciting to be here. I will send you, prego, Megan. I will send the PowerPoint and all the information that I promised, and I look forward to see you next week, again at 7 p.m. for our fourth and last session of deploying yourself. Thank you very much, everyone.